Now, in this lesson, we're going to go over yet another way of solving quadratic equations. And this is going to be done by what's called completing the square. Well, what's Drac doing over there? Well, he's completing his own square. But that's not exactly what I'm talking about. And let's explain to Drac what I really mean. Okay? Okay. Here's our first problem. Now, what we want to do is get a perfect square involving y on the left-hand side. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add 9 to both sides. Now, I'm going to take 1/2 the coefficient of y, 8. So we get 8 over 2, and square it. And then you add that to both sides. That will make the left-hand side a perfect square. We'll come out with y squared plus 8y plus 16. And then we can take and factor that so that we'll get y plus 4 squared equaling 25. And then we can go back and do what we did in the previous lesson, is take the square root of both sides. And so we'll get y plus 4 on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we'll get plus or minus 5. Now we work those two equations out, and we'll get y equals 1 and y equals -9 for our solutions. Now we can set those both equal to a 5 and a -5. Okay, let's do it again here, involving completing the square. Let's add 9 to both sides. And then what we're going to do is take 1/2 of 6, the coefficient of x, and square it, and then add it to both sides. So, in other words, we're adding 9 to both sides. So that makes the left-hand side, we can make that a perfect square, and we'll get x minus 3 squared, and then we'll have square root of 18, and that's 9 times 2 underneath the radical there, and we can pull out a 3. And so we'll get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. Add 3 to both sides, and we'll get x equals 3 plus or minus 3 times the square root of 2. Remember, those are two numbers, two different numbers there. This one here, let's take 1/2 of 6 and square it, and we'll get that'll give us a 9. And add that to both sides. And so then on the left-hand side there, that will be y plus 3 squared, equaling a -4. So now we got a negative under the radical when we take the square root of both sides. So on the right-hand side, we've got the square root of -1 times square root of 4. Square root of -1 is I. The square root of 4 is 2. So we get plus or minus 2i, and that's equal to y plus 3. And so we subtract 3 from both sides, you get y equals -3 plus or minus 2i. Here, let's take and subtract 5 from both sides. Now, let's take and divide through by a 4. And that's going to leave us with a 1 as a coefficient of x. Take 1/2 of that, 1/2 of 1, and square it to be 1/4. So we'll add 1/4 to both sides. So on the left-hand side, we're going to get x minus 1/2 squared equals a -1. And when you take the square roots, that square root of -1 on the right-hand side is just plus or minus an I. And then that's equal to x minus 1/2. And then add 1/2 to both sides, and we get x equals 1/2 plus or minus I. Now, on this one here, on the right-hand side, we need to multiply those two factors together first. And so we'll get x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6. Now you can add the 2x and the 3x together there on the right-hand side, and it's going to be 5x. And now let's take and subtract 11x from both sides. Now I want to take and subtract 6 from both sides. And so on the right hand side, we're going to take half of 6 and square it. And so that's adding 9 to both sides. And so on the left hand side, we're going to get a negative 1. And on the right hand side, we've got the quantity x minus 3 squared. When you take the square root of that, you're going to get a plus or minus I on the left hand side and an x minus 3 on the right hand side. Now let's just add 3 to both sides, and we'll get x equals 3 plus or minus I. Thank you.